They called him the God of Silence, a man who owned the police, the judges, and the streets of Chicago. Lorenzo Moretti was said to have no weaknesses. That was the myth. But on a freezing November night inside the most exclusive gala of the year, the city learned the truth. He had one vulnerability: his mother. When a cruel socialite forced a confused elderly woman to her knees in front of Chicago's elite, Lorenzo did something no one expected. He waited, he watched, until a girl with holes in her shoes and nothing left to lose stepped between the Wolf and the Lamb. This is the story of how a $20 an hour Maid changed the fate of a monster. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton reeked of old money, expensive perfume, and something rotten beneath it all. It was the annual winter solstice charity gala, a masquerade where predators dressed as philanthropists and called themselves saints. Crystal chandeliers, each weighing as much as a small car, shattered golden light across 300 guests sipping Dom Perignon. High above them, on the shadowed mezzanine balcony, Lorenzo Moretti stood like a gargoyle carved from obsidian. He didn't drink. He didn't smile. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, his gaze sweeping the room with the cold precision of a shark in shallow water. At 32, Lorenzo was the dawn of the Moretti crime family. To the public, he was a logistics magnate. To the underworld, he was simply known as the architect, a man who built empires and erased enemies with the same efficiency. "Sir," his bodyguard Silas murmured into the earpiece, his voice low and urgent. "Your mother has wandered away from the VIP table again? Nurse Hopkins is looking for her." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Find her gently," he said. "If anyone touches her, break their hand. Understood." Lorenzo leaned forward, scanning the crowd for the small, fragile figure of Isabella Moretti. His mother was in the early stages of dementia. Most days, she believed she was still a 19-year-old seamstress in Sicily. He brought her tonight against his better judgment because she had cried, begging to see the lights and hear the music. Lorenzo had never been able to refuse her. Not once on the ballroom floor. The night was suffocating for Sophie Clark. She shifted the weight of a heavy silver tray of hors d'oeuvres, her arms burning with fatigue. 23 years old, invisible and worn down, Sophie wore a generic black dress and white apron issued by the staffing agency, one size too big, clumsily pinned at the waist. She had been on her feet for 10 hours straight. Her rent was overdue. Her younger brother, Toby, needed an inhaler refill she couldn't afford until this shift paid out. "Champagne, sir." "Madame," Sophie murmured as she wove through the crowd. To them, she was a ghost. A moving table. Something that carried food and didn't exist. Near the center of the room, a disturbance rippled outward. The soft hum of conversation sharpened into whispers. Sophie turned and saw an elderly woman in a vintage velvet gown, slightly outdated, clearly out of place, stumbling near the chocolate fountain. It was Isabella. Her face was pale with fear, her hands clenched around a small beaded purse like a lifeline. The crowd parted around her, not to help, but to avoid her, as if confusion were contagious. Standing directly in Isabella's path was Beatrice Vane. Beatrice was the wife of a corrupt senator, a woman whose face had been pulled tight by surgery and whose heart was harder than the diamonds resting on her collarbone. She held a glass of red wine and laughed loudly at something someone beside her had said. Disoriented by the lights and the noise, Isabella reached out. "Matteo," she whispered, mistaking a passing waiter for her late husband. She stumbled. Her hand flailed and struck Beatrice's arm. The glass tipped, the sound it made as wine splashed across. Beatrice's pristine white Givenchy gown was like a gunshot in a library. The orchestra kept playing, but the space around them fell into absolute silence. Beatrice stared at her dress, her mouth opening in a soundless scream. Slowly, she lifted her head and fixed Isabella with a bulging, furious stare. "You stupid, senile old hag!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice slicing through the room. Isabella recoiled, shrinking inward. I'm sorry," she stammered. "The floor, it moved. I'm sorry." Beatrice stepped closer, towering over her. "Do you have any idea what this is?" She snapped, gesturing to her stained gown. "This is silk." It's worth more than your entire pathetic life. From the balcony above, Lorenzo's hands crushed the railing. The metal groaned under his grip. He took a step toward the stairs, blood turning to ice in his veins, then stopped. Security was moving in, and hesitating. Beatrice's vein was powerful. No one wanted to cross the senator's wife. Lorenzo forced himself to wait. He needed to see it to know which of the 300 allies and acquaintances below would help his mother. Show me, he thought darkly. Show me who deserves to survive the night. Beatrice wasn't finished. She seized Isabella's arm, her manicured nails biting into fragile skin. You ruined my night, she hissed. You're going to fix it? Please, Isabella whimpered, tears clouding her unfocused eyes. I just want to go home. You're not going anywhere, Beatrice snapped. She pointed to the marble floor where droplets of wine had splattered. Get on your knees. Use that rag you call a shawl. Clean it. They all watched. Men in tuxedos. Women dripping in pearls. No one moved. To them it was entertainment. I said, get on your knees. Beatrice shoved her. Isabella's legs buckled. She collapsed toward the cold marble floor, sobbing softly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Lorenzo felt a surge of rage so pure it nearly blinded him. His hand slipped inside his jacket, closing around the gun he wasn't supposed to have. He was going to kill Beatrice Vane right here, in the middle of the Palmer House ballroom. Consequences be damned. Then a blur of black and white cut across the floor. Sophie didn't think. She didn't weigh the risk. She saw her own grandmother in the terror on that woman's face. The tray of hors d'oeuvres slammed into a side table, crab cakes scattering across the marble. Sophie sprinted the final 10 feet and slid. Sophie moved instinctively, sliding between Beatrice and Isabella just as the older woman began to collapse. She caught Isabella in time, wrapping her strong, work-hardened arms around the frail shoulders and holding her upright. Don't you dare touch her, Sophie said. Her voice trembled, but it carried clear and unmistakable. Beatrice blinked in disbelief, staring at the maid as if something unspeakable had just spoken. Excuse me? Beatrice snapped. Do you have any idea who I am? Move aside, you little servant. Sophie didn't move. She felt Isabella shaking against her chest, fragile as a bird trapped in a storm. I don't care who you are, Sophie said, her heart pounding. She's confused. She's scared. And you're harassing an elderly woman over a piece of fabric. Have you no shame? A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A maid lecturing Beatrice Vane's social suicide in real time. Beatrice's face flushed a furious red. Manager? She screamed. Where is the manager? I want this girl fired. I want her arrested? The hotel manager, a pale, sweating man named Mr. Henderson, hurried over. Mrs. Vane, I'm so sorry. Fire her. Beatrice shrieked, pointing violently at Sophie. And throw this old witch out onto the street. Sophie tightened her hold on Isabella. It's okay, she whispered into her ear, ignoring the shouting. I've got you. No one's going to hurt you. Fueled by the lack of instant obedience, Beatrice snatched a glass of champagne from a frozen waiter. You want to protect trash? She sneered. Then you can smell like it too. She hurled the glass. Sophie saw it coming and turned, shielding Isabella with her body. The cold, sticky liquid splashed across Sophie's face and chest, soaking her hair and dripping down her apron. She gasped at the shock, but didn't let go. There, Beatrice laughed, scanning the room for approval. Now the help looks just like the hag. Sophie wiped champagne from her eyes and straightened. Even drenched, dignity radiated from her. She met Beatrice's gaze without flinching. If humiliating me makes you feel powerful, ma'am, Sophie said calmly, then I pity you. My clothes are ruined, but your character was ruined long before tonight. Silence fell, heavy, terrifying. Beatrice lifted her hand to strike. Oh, you insolent Beatrice. The name was spoken softly, yet it cut through the ballroom like a whip. Every head turned toward the grand staircase as the crowd parted instinctively. Lorenzo Moretti descended step by step, his movements unhurried. His face was composed, cold, flawless marble, but his eyes burned with a promise of destruction. He ignored the guests, ignored the manager, and walked straight into the circle. His shoes made no sound. Beatrice's raised hand froze. Her arrogance vanished, replaced by raw fear. Everyone knew Lorenzo Moretti, and everyone knew that crossing him meant more than losing money. It meant disappearing. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at Beatrice, then at the manager. Finally, his gaze settled on Sophie. He saw champagne dripping from her chin. He saw the fierce way she protected his mother. He saw fear in her eyes locked in combat with a stubborn courage he hadn't witnessed in years. Lorenzo stepped closer. Sophie flinched, bracing herself. He reached out. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the blow never came. Instead, Lorenzo removed a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and gently dabbed the champagne from her cheek. The room held its breath. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low and resonant. Sophie opened her eyes and found herself staring into the darkest, most intense gaze she had ever known. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie Clark?" Lorenzo nodded once, then turned to Isabella. "Mama," he said softly. "Are you hurt?" Isabella smiled up at him. "Enzo, this sweet girl, she caught me." She stopped the floor from moving. "I know," Lorenzo replied. "I saw." He turned back to Beatrice Vane, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "Mrs. Vane," Lorenzo said, politely, making it infinitely more terrifying. "You appear to have mistaken my mother for someone who tolerates disrespect. And you have mistaken this young woman," he gestured to Sophie, "for someone without a protector." Beatrice shook so violently her jewelry clinked. "Mr. Moretti, I didn't know. I thought she was nobody. Nobody." Lorenzo stepped into her space. She smelled of fear and expensive wine. "You humiliated the woman who gave me life. And you assaulted the only person here with enough honor to stand against you." He turned to the manager. "Mr. Henderson." "Yes, Mr. Moretti." "Mrs. Vane is leaving, now." His voice never rose. "It didn't need to. And if she is ever allowed into any establishment you manage again, I will buy the building and burn it to the ground with you inside. Do we understand each other?" Yes, of course, Mr. Moretti." Security rushed in. Beatrice was dragged away, sobbing and pleading, her power stripped bare. Lorenzo turned back to Sophie. She was shaking partly from the cold, partly from adrenaline. She tried to step away. I should go. I'm going to be fired." "No," Lorenzo said. He removed his tuxedo jacket, heavy, warm, scented with sandalwood and authority, and draped it over her soaked shoulders. It enveloped her completely. "You're not fired, Sophie Clark," he said, fastening the jacket at her collar, his knuckles brushing her skin. "You've been promoted." Sophie stared up at him, stunned. I don't understand." Lorenzo offered his arm to his mother. Then, to the shock of everyone in the ballroom and soon the entire city of Chicago, he extended his other arm to the champagne-soaked Maid, as they left the ballroom behind. Stunned, silence trailing in their wake, Sophie didn't yet realize she had just stepped out of her old life and straight into the lion's den. And the lion was hungry. The air outside the Palmer house cut like a blade. A brutal Chicago wind that tore through coats and skin alike, but Sophie barely noticed. She was wrapped in Lorenzo Moretti's tuxedo jacket, a single garment worth more than she earned in a year. A sleek, armored Mercedes-Maybach glided to the curb with the quiet menace of a panther. Silas, the massive bodyguard from the balcony, opened the rear door. "Get in," Lorenzo said. It wasn't a request. Sophie hesitated on the sidewalk as the adrenaline drained away, replaced by icy dread. She had publicly humiliated a senator's wife and walked out with the most dangerous criminal in the city. "Mr. Moretti, I really should go home. My shift is over. The agency will be worried." Lorenzo's eyes were dark beneath the streetlights. "The agency has already been informed that you are no longer their employee. You're with me now." "What?" Sophie stepped back. "You can't just—" "Sophie." Isabella's voice floated gently from inside the car. The elderly woman was already seated, wrapped in a cashmere blanket Silas had produced. "Please, dear," she said softly. The dark frightens me. I need someone to hold my hand. Sophie looked at Isabella, her wide, pleading eyes, then at Lorenzo. His face was unreadable, his hand still holding the door open, waiting. "My brother," Sophie said quietly. "I have to get home to my brother. He's sick. He's waiting for me." "We'll take care of it," Lorenzo replied evenly. "Get in the car, Sophie." She understood then that she had only two choices, run and likely be hunted, or get in and see where this rabbit hole led. She glanced at Isabella once more. With a defeated sigh, Sophie climbed into the back seat. The interior smelled of rich leather and expensive scotch. Lorenzo slid in beside her, the door sealing shut with a heavy, pressurized thud that cut them off from the outside world. As the car merged into traffic, silence filled the cabin. Sophie sat rigid, hands folded in her lap, sticky with spilled champagne. Isabella immediately reached out, taking Sophie's hand and humming a soft Italian lullaby. Across from them, Lorenzo watched, calculating. Studying Sophie the way he studied hostile takeovers, he noticed the scuffed black shoes, the red, chapped knuckles of a girl who scrubbed floors for a living, the hollow shadows beneath her cheekbones that spoke of missed meals. "Why did you do it?" Lorenzo asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Sophie flinched. "Do what?" "Step in. You knew who Beatrice Vane was. Everyone does. You knew you'd lose your job. Why risk everything for a stranger?" Sophie looked down at Isabella's hand resting in hers. "She reminded me of my grandmother," she said softly. She had dementia too. People treated her like furniture, like she stopped being human just because her memory was fading. She lifted her gaze, defiance flashing in her eyes. "It's wrong. No one deserves to be humiliated just because they're confused." Lorenzo studied her carefully. In his world, loyalty was purchased and altruism was a lie. People acted only when there was something to gain. Yet this girl, hungry, terrified, had thrown herself in front of a social predator for nothing. "There's fire in you, Sophie Clark," he murmured. "I like it." He pressed a button on the console. A glass partition slid up, separating them from the driver. "Let's talk business." "I'm a maid, Mr. Moretti," Sophie said. "I don't have business with the head of the Moretti crime family." Lorenzo's lips curved faintly. "You know who I am? Good, that saves time." "I need a caretaker for my mother." Sophie blinked. "You already have nurses." "I saw them." "I have employees," Lorenzo corrected. "People who watch her for a paycheck. They're cold, clinical, they're afraid of her because they're afraid of me. Tonight you weren't afraid. You protected her. You treated her with dignity." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to hire you, exclusively. You'll live at the estate. You'll be her companion. You'll make sure she never feels scared or alone again." Sophie shook her head. "I can't. I have Toby. He's 16. I'm his legal guardian. I can't just move into a mob boss's house. Bring him." She froze. "Excuse me?" "Bring the boy," Lorenzo said casually, as if ordering coffee. "The estate is 10 acres. Plenty of room. He's still in school, I assume. We have a driver. And if he's sick, as you say, my private physician is among the best in the country?" Her heart slammed against her ribs. She knew exactly what this was, a deal with the devil. She thought of the stack of final notice letters on her kitchen counter. Toby's wheezing at night because they couldn't afford the good inhalers. The leaking roof in their apartment in the worst part of town. "How much?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. $10,000 a month, plus room, board, and all medical expenses for your brother. Sophie's mouth went dry. 10,000. More than she earned in 6 months. Freedom, safety, and a trap. "What's the catch?" she whispered, Lorenzo's gaze locked onto hers, intense, possessive. "You belong to the family now. You live in my house. You follow my rules. And the most important rule is simple." He extended his hand. "What happens in the Moretti estate stays in the Moretti estate. You see nothing. You hear nothing. You speak to no one without my permission. Do we have a deal, Sophie?" She stared at his hand-large, immaculate, dangerous, then looked at Isabella, asleep beside her. Unaware that Sophie's answer would change everything, Lorenzo didn't release her right away. He held on a heartbeat longer than necessary, his grip deliberate. "Good," he said quietly. "Welcome home, Sophie." The Moretti estate wasn't a house. It was a fortress masquerading as a mansion, hidden in the wealthy suburb of Lake Forest. 12-foot stone walls ringed the property, crowned with electrified fencing. As the car rolled through the towering iron gates, Sophie spotted men patrolling the grounds with German shepherds. They wore tailored suits, but the unmistakable bulges beneath their jackets told the real story. "Is all this really necessary?" Sophie asked, staring out the window. "I have many enemies," Lorenzo replied calmly. "Safety is an illusion unless you enforce it." The car came to a stop before a sprawling Gothic Revival mansion built of gray stone. Backlit by moonlight, it looked imposing, almost haunted. Silas stepped out first and opened the door. "We're here, boss." Lorenzo exited and helped his mother down. Isabella stirred, blinking in confusion. "Are we in Rome, Enzo?" "No, Mama," he said gently. "We're home. Go with Nurse Hopkins." A stern woman in scrubs waited at the entrance, visibly shaken as she approached Lorenzo. "Sir, I'm so sorry I lost her at the gala. We'll discuss your incompetence later," Lorenzo cut in, his voice slicing through the night air. "Take her to bed. If she wakes up distressed tonight, you're fired before sunrise." The nurse paled, took Isabella by the arm, and hurried her inside. Lorenzo then turned to Sophie. She stood beside the car, suddenly small and overwhelmed in the vast driveway. "Come," he said. "Silas will bring your brother here in the morning. Tonight you stay—" "I can't leave Toby alone," Sophie protested. "He'll worry. He's already been contacted," Lorenzo replied, walking toward the massive oak doors. "One of my men went to your apartment. He gave Toby a phone so he could call you. He's safe. There's a guard outside your door right now." Sophie froze. "You sent men to my home without asking me?" Lorenzo stopped and turned slowly. "I'm a thorough man, Sophie. I needed to verify your story. And I needed to make sure my new investment wasn't going to disappear." "I'm not an investment," she snapped, exhaustion giving way to anger. "I'm a person." Lorenzo stepped closer, towering over her. "In this house, you are what I say you are. Now come inside. It's freezing." Fuming and powerless, Sophie followed him. Inside, the mansion was breathtaking and cold. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, priceless art that belonged in museums. But no photographs. No warmth. It felt like a mausoleum for the living. Lorenzo led her into a library heavy with the scent of old paper and cigar smoke. A fire crackled in the hearth, the first real warmth she'd felt all night. "Sit," he ordered. Pointing to a leather armchair, Sophie obeyed, watching as Lorenzo crossed to a mahogany desk and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "Brandy. It helps with shock." She took the glass but didn't drink. "So what now? Do I sign a contract in blood?" Lorenzo let out a low, dark chuckle. He lifted a manila folder from the desk and tossed it into her lap. "Open it." Sophie did, and her breath caught. It was her life. Photos of her walking to work. Toby outside his school. Copies of unpaid electric bills. Her father's death certificate from a construction accident 5 years ago, an accident the company never compensated. She looked up, horrified. "How do you have this?" She whispered. "We've known each other for an hour. I have analysts who can dig up the history of a ghost in 10 minutes, Lorenzo said, leaning back against the desk. "I know everything, Sophie. I know you dropped out of nursing school to raise Toby after your father died. I know you're $42,000 in debt. I know your landlord, Mr. Russo, plans to evict you by Friday." He sipped his brandy, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You're drowning. I'm the lifeboat." Sophie felt exposed, every secret, every failure, every fear laid bare for this billionaire criminal to judge. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You could hire anyone. Why go through all this for a maid?" Lorenzo set his glass down and stepped in front of her. He lifted her chin so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "Because when Beatrice Vane threw that champagne, you didn't flinch," he said softly. "You didn't look for an escape. You stood your ground. Loyalty like that is rare. It can't be taught. It has to be born." His thumb brushed her lower lip in intimate, shocking gesture. Sophie stopped breathing. "I need someone I can trust with my mother's life," Lorenzo continued. "My enemies would love to use her against me. They'd hurt her to reach me. I need a guard dog, Sophie, one that looks like a lamb but bites like a wolf. I believe that's you." He stepped back, picked up a pen, and placed a document on the table beside her. The contract, salary, benefits, confidentiality, it also states that betrayal comes with severe consequences. Sophie stared at the paper. It was her salvation. Toby's future. And the end of her freedom. She thought of the freezing apartment, of Beatrice Vane's laughter, of the way Lorenzo had draped his jacket over her shoulders. Slowly, she picked up the pen. "I have one condition," she said, her hand hovering. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. "You're not in a position to negotiate. But go on. Amuse me." "I want to finish my nursing degree," she said. "Online at night when Isabella is asleep. You pay the tuition." Lorenzo studied her in silence. Then, for the first time, a genuine smile touched his lips, not the cold smirk from before, but something real. It softened him completely, transforming his face. The firelight carved sharp angles across his face, making him devastatingly handsome. "Done," he said calmly. Sophie signed the paper. "Welcome to the family," Lorenzo replied. He took the document and locked it inside a drawer. "Now get some rest. Your room is on the 3rd floor, 2nd door on the left. Don't wander. The motion sensors are live." Sophie rose on unsteady legs. She reached the door, then hesitated. "Mr. Moretti." "Lorenzo," he corrected without turning, pouring himself another drink. "Call me Lorenzo." "Lorenzo," she repeated, testing the weight of the name. It settled heavily. "Thank you for the jacket. Good night. Good night, Sophie." She stepped into the silent corridor. As she climbed the sweeping staircase, she didn't notice the shadows shifting along the walls. She didn't realize that signing that paper had painted a target on her back. Lorenzo hadn't just hired a maid, he had introduced a weakness into his fortress. And in the Chicago underworld, weakness was blood in the water. Inside the library, Lorenzo watched the security monitor. He saw Sophie enter her room and lock the door. He picked up his phone and dialed. "It's done," he said quietly. "She's in. Dig deeper into her background. I want ex-boyfriends, distant relatives, anyone who could be used as leverage. If you find someone, remove them." He ended the call and stared into the fire. The game had shifted, and for the first time in years, Lorenzo Moretti didn't know whether he was the hunter or the prey. 3 weeks passed after the night of the gala. The Moretti estate had a rhythm, and Sophie was slowly learning its steps. Most days were spent with Isabella. Unexpectedly, the elderly woman blossomed under her care. Mornings were devoted to the heated conservatory, pruning orchids among shafts of sunlight. Sophie played old Italian vinyl records she'd discovered in the attic, and for hours Isabella would be lucid, reminiscing about the Amalfi Coast, lemon groves, and a boy named Matteo who once stole her heart. Sophie's younger brother Toby adjusted far less easily. He lived in the guest wing, surrounded by every gaming console imaginable, gifts from Lorenzo, but suspicion lingered. "This isn't normal, Soph," he whispered during dinner. "These people have guns under their coats. I saw the gardener cleaning a pistol in the shed." "We're safe," Sophie assured him, though doubt lingered beneath her words. "Just focus on school. Mr. Moretti hired the best tutors. Lorenzo himself was a ghost." Sophie rarely saw him. He left before sunrise and returned long after the house slept. Yet his presence was everywhere, in the fresh flowers placed in her room, in the carefully selected nursing textbooks delivered by courier, and in the way the guards now looked at her with quiet respect. Then, on a storm-lashed Tuesday night, the routine shattered. Sophie was in the kitchen preparing herbal tea for Isabella. The house was hushed, rain hammering against reinforced glass. She turned and froze. Lorenzo sat at the small kitchen island, watching her. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt hung open at the collar, revealing the edge of a dark tattoo. He looked worn down, eyes rimmed red. "I didn't hear you come in," Sophie said, clutching her chest. "I know how to move quietly," Lorenzo replied, his voice rough. "It's a survival skill." He nodded at the teapot. "Enough for two?" She poured him a cup and slid it across the marble. Their fingers brushed. The spark was still there, stronger now. "How is she?" Lorenzo asked, staring into the steam. "She's having a good week," Sophie said softly. "She remembers your birthday. She wants to bake a cake. She keeps asking if you like lemon." He looked up, stunned. "She remembers my birthday?" "She hasn't remembered that in 3 years. She remembers how you felt," Sophie said. "She says you were always serious, that you carried the world on your shoulders even at 10. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "She's right. My father died when I was 10. I became the man of the house that day." He studied Sophie, really saw her. The oversized sweater, the leggings, her hair twisted into a messy bun. She looked warm, domestic. Everything his life was not. "You look tired," she said gently. "Is my mother too much?" "No," Sophie answered quickly. "I love her. She's the grandmother I wish I still had." She hesitated. "But I'm worried about Toby. He feels trapped. He can't leave without an escort. He's 16. He wants movies, friends." Lorenzo sipped his tea. "The Salvaro family put a $5 million bounty on my head. If Toby walks out alone, he's taken within an hour to reach me or to reach you." Sophie's face drained of color. "To reach me?" "You matter to my mother," Lorenzo said, eyes sharp. "That makes you a weakness. And my enemies hunt weakness." He moved closer, crowding her space. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. "I warned you, Sophie. You're in the spider's web now. You don't just fly away." He lifted a hand, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch burned. Sophie forgot how to breathe. "But don't worry," he murmured, leaning in, lips inches from hers. "I'm a very possessive spider. I don't let anyone touch what's mine." The air crackled. Her heart raced, caught between fear and something dangerously close to desire. The kitchen door slammed open. "Sir!" Silas shouted, gun drawn. Perimeter breach. Sector 4. Lorenzo changed instantly. The exhausted man vanished. The Don emerged, eyes cold, posture lethal. "Where?" He snapped, pulling a sleek black handgun from his waistband. "Delivery entrance." They came in disguised as a delivery using a fake courier van? "Secure my mother," Lorenzo barked, seizing Sophie's arm. "You're coming with me. I'm not letting you out of my sight." "But Toby," Sophie screamed. "Silas has Toby." "Move!" Lorenzo dragged her from the kitchen just as automatic gunfire tore the hallway. The mansion plunged into chaos. Alarms screamed, a piercing, relentless wail that rattled the walls. He shoved Sophie into the library, slammed the heavy oak door shut, and locked it. With brutal strength, he heaved a massive bookshelf across the doorway, barricading it. "Stay down," he ordered, forcing her behind the solid mahogany desk. "What's happening?" Sophie cried, clamping her hands over her ears as bullets thundered just beyond the door. "An assassination attempt," Lorenzo replied evenly, checking the magazine of his gun. "The Salvaros. They never should have breached the gates." His jaw tightened. "Someone let them in." His eyes burned with fury. "Someone on my payroll sold me out." The door handle shook violently. Then bullets tore into the wood, splinters exploding into the room. "Lorenzo!" Sophie screamed. "Quiet," he hissed, sliding to the side of the door and waiting. The wood finally gave way. The door burst open. A man in tactical gear and a balaclava stormed in. Lorenzo moved like a viper, grabbing the gun barrel, wrenching it upward and firing twice into the man's chest. The intruder collapsed instantly. 2 more rushed in. Lorenzo ducked behind a leather armchair, firing back. Bang, bang, one man went down. The other dove behind a sofa. "Give it up, Moretti." The gunman shouted. "We have the boy!" The blood drained from Sophie's face. She rose from behind the desk. "No, Sophie, get down." Lorenzo roared. "We have the kid." The man yelled, "Come out or we bleed him." Sophie didn't think. Instinct took over, her eyes locked on a heavy bronze bust of Julius Caesar on the desk. She grabbed it, muscles screaming, and while the gunman focused on Lorenzo's position, she hurled it with everything she had. The statue sailed over the sofa and struck the man square in the head with a sickening crack. He dropped without a sound. Lorenzo stood frozen, staring at her in disbelief. "They have Toby," Sophie gasped, ripping the gun from the dead man's hand. She didn't know how to use it, but her hands shook with rage, not fear. "Where is he?" Lorenzo looked at her, this maid, this gentle girl who cried over flowers now, gripping a semi-automatic weapon with the ferocity of a lioness. "Follow me," he said. "Stay close." They stepped into the hallway. Lorenzo's guards lay motionless on the floor. The air reeked of cordite and blood. At the top of the main staircase, they stopped. Below, in the foyer, 3 men were holding Toby. One pressed a knife to the boy's throat. Toby was sobbing, his face bruised and swollen. Isabella was there too, crouched on the stairs, screaming hysterically, "Let him go! Go away! Drop the gun, Moretti!" The leader stepped forward, a scarred man Sophie recognized instantly from the news, Marco Salvaro. The rival Don's son. Lorenzo halted at the top of the stairs and slowly raised his hands, gun visible. "Let the boy go, Marco. This is between you and me." "The boy dies," Marco sneered. "Then the maid. Then you. Wait." Sophie stepped out from behind Lorenzo. "Sophie, no." Lorenzo shouted, "Take me!" She cried, walking down the stairs with her hands raised. "I'm the one he cares about. Look at me, I live in his house. Let the boy go, he's nothing. Take me instead." Lorenzo froze. His heart stopped. She was offering herself. Marco studied Sophie, then Lorenzo. He saw it, the panic in Lorenzo's eyes. Not fear for money. Not fear for power. Fear for her. Marco smiled. Well. The architect has a heart after all. He shoved Toby toward the stairs. "Deal, the girl for the boy." "Run, kid." Toby scrambled upward, sobbing. Sophie passed him, whispering, "Safe room." "Lock the door." She reached the bottom step. Marco seized her hair, yanking her back as he pressed the cold blade to her neck. "Now," he grinned at Lorenzo, "drop the gun or I open her throat." Lorenzo let the gun fall. It clattered against the marble. "Good," Marco said. "Now kill him." He signaled his men, but before the rifles could fire, a shadow peeled itself from the darkness. Behind them, Silus, bleeding from a shoulder wound but alive. A shotgun in his hands, boom, the man on the left disintegrated, in the chaos. Sophie stomped hard on Marco's foot and slammed her elbow into his ribs. He grunted, the knife slipping. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He vaulted the banister, dropping 12 feet. He hit the floor in a roll and slammed into Marco before the man could recover. The fight was savage and fast. Years of bottled rage exploded free. Lorenzo snapped Marco's arm with a sickening crack, then finished it with a brutal strike to the temple. Silence crashed down over the foyer. Lorenzo straightened, chest heaving, knuckles slick with blood. He turned. Sophie stood trembling, a thin red line at her neck where the blade had kissed her skin. "Sophie," he breathed. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and crushed her against him, burying his face in her neck, holding her so tightly it hurt. "You foolish, brave girl," he whispered. "You could have died." "He had Toby," she sobbed into his chest. "I couldn't let them hurt Toby." Lorenzo pulled back, cupping her face. His eyes were wild. "I would have burned the city to ash if they took you." Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was raw adrenaline, survival, possession. It tasted of blood and fear and undeniable desire. Sophie kissed him back, clutching his shirt, anchoring herself in the storm. Ahem. Silas cleared his throat, leaning against the wall with the shotgun. Boss, we've got a problem. Lorenzo broke the kiss instantly, shielding Sophie with his body. What? Silas lifted the barrel of his gun toward the top of the stairs. Nurse. Hopkins was standing there. She wasn't cowering. The nurse stood there. Hands shaking, a pistol pointed straight at Isabella. I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. The Salvaros offered me $2 million. I have debts too. Lorenzo went perfectly still. If you hurt her, Hopkins, he said coldly, death will be a mercy I will not grant you. Back off! Hopkins screamed. Open the front door. I'm taking the old woman with me. Sophie looked at Isabella. The old woman seemed confused but not afraid. Her eyes were fixed on Sophie. Suddenly, Isabella reached into her pocket. She pulled out the pair of gardening shears Sophie had lost 3 days earlier. Bad nurse, Isabella muttered, driving the shears into Hopkins's thigh. Hopkins shrieked and dropped the gun. Silas moved instantly, racing up the stairs to restrain the nurse. Lorenzo looked at his mother, then at Sophie, and started to laugh a dark, relieved sound. My women, he said, shaking his head. They are more dangerous than my men. As the adrenaline drained away, Sophie felt her legs give out. The room spun and darkness swallowed her whole when Sophie opened her eyes. Everything was white and smelled of antiseptic and expensive lilac. She blinked, trying to push through the fog in her mind. She wasn't in her room. She was in a hospital, but unlike any she had ever seen. The walls were polished mahogany, the linens silk, and beyond the windows stretched the private gardens of the Moretti estate. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her side made her gasp. Don't move! The voice was rough, like gravel scraping stone. Sophie turned her head. Lorenzo sat in a wingback chair beside the bed. He looked exhausted. His stubble had grown into a beard, his eyes were bloodshot, and he still wore the same blood-stained white shirt from the night of the attack. Lorenzo, she croaked. How long? 2 days, he said, standing and pouring her a glass of water with a shaking hand. He held the straw to her lips. You lost a lot of blood? The knife missed the artery by 2 millimeters. You also have a concussion. Sophie drank greedily, the cool water soothing her burning throat. The memories rushed back, the gunfire, Marco Salvaro, the knife at her neck. Toby, she gasped, gripping Lorenzo's wrist. Where is Toby? He's fine, Lorenzo assured her, covering her hand with his. He's in the game room with Silas. I think Silas is teaching him poker. The boy is resilient. Sophie exhaled, sinking back into the pillows. And Isabella? She's baking cookies for the security team, Lorenzo said, a tired smile touching his lips. She believes she defeated the bad man with her gardening shears. She's very proud of herself. Sophie let out a weak laugh that dissolved into a wheeze. She did, she whispered. She saved us. Lorenzo's expression darkened. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He looked at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You saved us, Sophie. He traced the bandage on her neck, his touch feather-light. I watched the security footage. You threw a bust at an armed man. You offered yourself as a hostage. You fought back. He paused, jaw tightening. You are the most foolish person I have ever met. I did what I had to do, Sophie whispered. You are a maid, Lorenzo said, his voice rising slightly. You are supposed to hide. You are not supposed to bleed for this family. I'm not just a maid, though, am I? Sophie challenged, searching his eyes. Not anymore? Lorenzo stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, the contract she had signed 3 weeks earlier, the one that gave her a salary, a home, and rules. He held it up for her to see. Slowly, deliberately, he tore it in half. Then into quarters. The pieces drifted to the floor like falling snow. Sophie's heart dropped. You're firing me. Panic surged in her chest. Lorenzo, please. I have nowhere to go. If this is about the danger, I don't care. I can't go back to that apartment. I can't. Sophie, stop. He took her shoulders gently. I'm not firing you. I'm voiding the contract because it's an insult to what you are to me now. He leaned closer, his dark eyes burning with possessive fire. Employees are replaceable? You are not. Then what am I? Sophie asked, her breath catching. You are my partner, Lorenzo said firmly. You're the woman who stood in the fire with me and didn't burn. I don't want a maid, Sophie. I have plenty of people to clean my floors. I want a queen. He took her hand and kissed her palm. The Salvaros are gone? Marco is in a hole he will never crawl out of. Nurse Hopkins has been dealt with. The threat is neutralized, but my world is still dangerous. It always will be. He searched her soul with his gaze. I'm asking you to stay. Not for the money, not for the nursing degree. For me. Stay and rule this city by my side? Sophie looked at the man who had terrified Chicago for a decade. She saw the monster the world feared, but she also saw the man who wiped champagne from her face, who loved his mother, who had sat by her bed for 2 sleepless days. She thought of her old life, the invisibility, the struggle, the cold. Then she looked at the man offering her everything. I have conditions, she whispered, a smile tugging at her lips. Lorenzo laughed, rich and genuine. Of course you do. Name them. Toby goes to a real high school. No more home tutors. He needs friends. Done. I'll assign security that shadows him invisibly. Isabella stays with us, always. No nursing homes. Lorenzo's voice softened. She is my mother, Sophie. I would burn the world before I sent her away. Granted. Sophie took a breath. And one more thing, Lorenzo. Some promises don't need words to carry their weight. She grabbed his shirt collar, pulling him closer, her voice firm but amused. He had to swear he'd never wear that shirt again. It was beyond saving. Lorenzo smirked, amused and unbothered. He promised to burn it. Then he leaned in and kissed her, sealing the vow in silence. From that moment on, they stood together, united. The architect had finally found his foundation. 6 months later, the annual Winter Solstice Charity Gala returned to the Palmer House Hilton. The ballroom was every bit as extravagant as before. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Champagne flowed freely, and Chicago's elite gathered to gossip, observe, and posture. Yet something felt different this year. A subtle tension lingered in the air. Anticipation. Everyone was waiting for something. Or someone. At the top of the grand staircase, the music swelled. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer declared, his voice echoing through the hall. Mr. Lorenzo Moretti and Mrs. Sophie Moretti. The room fell silent. Lorenzo stepped into view, striking in a midnight blue tuxedo, but no one was looking at him. Every gaze locked onto Sophie. She wore a gown of liquid gold sculpted flawlessly to her form-custom Versace, designed exclusively for her. Her once messy hair flowed in smooth, polished waves, and at her throat rested a necklace of emeralds and diamonds worth more than the hotel itself, but it wasn't the luxury that stopped the room. It was her presence. The tired, hunched girl who once carried heavy trays was gone. In her place stood a woman who radiated quiet authority. Her posture was confident, her gaze sharp and composed, scanning the crowd with a calculating intelligence learned at her husband's side. With her hand resting lightly on Lorenzo's arm, they descended the staircase together, moving as a single force. When they reached the floor, the crowd parted instantly. Respect and fear cleared a path. Near the chocolate fountain, exactly where everything had unraveled a year earlier, stood a familiar face. Beatrice Vane, the senator's wife, had managed to crawl back into a handful of social circles, though her reputation remained in ruins. The moment she saw Sophie, she froze. Her wine glass shook visibly in her hand. Lorenzo stopped. He glanced at Beatrice, then down at his wife. Do you want me to have her removed? He asked quietly. Sophie studied the older woman. She saw the fear in her eyes. She noticed how Beatrice's companion subtly stepped away, unwilling to stand too close to the fallout. Sophie smiled, not cruelly, not with triumph, but with unmistakable pity. No. Sophie said clearly, her voice carrying to nearby guests. Let her stay. Everyone should see what the past looks like. I'm only interested in the future. She turned her back on Beatrice Vane. Champagne, my love? Lorenzo asked, signaling a waiter. Yes, please, Sophie replied. The waiter approached a young girl, barely 20, visibly exhausted and terrified. Her apron sat awkwardly at her waist, her hands trembling as she balanced the tray. Sophie noticed everything, the worn shoes, the fear behind her eyes, the quiet desperation. She stopped her gently. What's your name? Sophie asked. Jenny, ma'am, the girl answered. Panic flickering across her face, afraid she'd done something wrong, Sophie accepted a glass of champagne, then reached into her clutch and pulled out a business card. Thick, cream-colored cardstock. The Moretti crest embossed in gold. Jenny, Sophie said softly, my grandmother needs a companion in the afternoons. $30 an hour, full benefits, and we'll cover your tuition if you're in school. Call this number tomorrow. The girl's jaw dropped. Tears welled in her eyes. Ma'am, are you serious? Completely, Sophie said with a nod. Don't be late. She turned back to Lorenzo, who was watching her with unmistakable admiration. You're soft, he teased. Sliding an arm around her waist. I'm not soft, Sophie replied, leaning into him. I'm building my own army. You have your soldiers, Lorenzo. I have the people no one else sees. Lorenzo laughed, pressing a kiss to her temple. Remind me never to cross you, Mrs. Moretti. You'd better not, she whispered. They stepped onto the dance floor together, the king and queen of Chicago. Music swirled around them, lights reflecting off gold and crystal. And for the first time in his life, Lorenzo Moretti didn't watch the exits. He didn't search for threats. He only watched his wife, the maid who had once saved his mother, hadn't just cleaned up a mess she had healed his soul. As they turned beneath the golden lights. They both understood something clearly. This was the only story that truly mattered. A single act of kindness had rewritten the destiny of the most dangerous man in Chicago, because real strength isn't measured by power or wealth. True strength is standing up for the vulnerable when everyone else is watching and laughing. Sophie Clark began as a ghost in a crowded room. She ended as a woman who ruled the city, not with fear or money, but with something far rarer, a brave heart. Lorenzo and Sophie's story proves that even in the darkest worlds, light can find its way in if you're willing to open the door. So tell me, what would you have done in Sophie's place? Would you have stepped in or stayed silent? Let me know in the comments below. Does the story moved you? Hit the like button, it truly helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a daily dose of drama, romance, and real-life storytelling. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.